Now, more of Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the only show directly addressing the problems and solutions for Illinois. Now, from AM 560, here's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Pat Hughes. And Pat, very provocative piece in the Wall Street Journal this week. How Trump won in two dimensions. The voter study group's Lee Drutman looked beyond the simple left-right paradigm in a questionnaire asking 2016 voters to identify both how they voted and how they felt about various economic and social issues. And then he mapped the results, as econometricians do. 73% of all voters were left of center on economics. All voters. Most of the remaining Trump supporters were quite moderate on economic questions. Trump voters very conservative on social issues, moderate on economic ones. Very conservative on social issues, moderate on economic ones. A president who got to the Oval Office through the Midwest. Very conservative on social issues, moderate on economic ones.
So this doesn't surprise. I'm a social conservative, as you know, as are you. This doesn't surprise me at all, because I know through data and through experience that people are much more socially conservative than the left-wing media and people who are trying to kowtow to the moneyed classes on our North Shore and otherwise lead us to believe.
A lot of Republicans, a lot of Republicans, establishment Republicans, not just on the North Shore. I'm a fiscal conservative, social moderate. Everybody's a fiscal conservative and social moderate, except the voters, apparently.
That's my point.
The presidential candidate like Ted Cruz, Mr. Drutman's research contends, who defines himself primarily through right-wing economic policies, free market economic policies, begins with nearly three-quarters of the electorate in the other camp. While a great majority of voters were liberal on economic issues, not classical liberal, but left, a small majority were social conservatives. A small majority of the electorate, social conservatives. Only 3.8% were libertarians, free market and socially liberal. The crucial difference between the two parties, this memorialized by F.H. Buckley as a law professor, George Mason, came down to social concerns, including pride in America, immigration, and especially moral issues such as abortion and gay marriage. The social conservative awakening that helped elect Mr. Trump came when voters connected the dots, recognizes that the left agenda amounted to something more than a shield to protect sexual minorities. It was a sword to be used against social conservatives. So the reference is to, it's one thing to be indifferent to the redefinition of marriage. It's another thing for my business to be taken away if I'm not indifferent.
Yeah, they're opposed to totalitarianism, which is what that leads to.
It's another thing to force Hobby Lobby to do this.
Correct.
It's another thing to force the Little Sisters of the Poor to do that. That's where they started getting far afield. And the problem is the Democrats, per their leadership, have a very difficult time changing this dynamic. The sweet spot in American politics, per this data, economic, left, social conservative. It's the place where presidential elections are won, and the winner is usually going to be the candidate who won't touch Social Security and who promises to nominate judges in the mold of Antonin Scalia. In other words, Trump. And he goes on to point out the bind the Democrats are in. We're in a bit of a bind here in the Republican Party because we're not economically free market. I wouldn't say that the party advocates for the Bernie Sanders better deal program either, but we're corporatist. And the argument is all the moral issues that are non-fiscal need to be off the table, even when they're forced on the table, as the General Assembly has done to Governor Rauner with two important pieces of legislation pending his action, signature or veto, before the month is out. One being transgender birth certificates. I can change my birth certificate to whatever gender I feel on whatever day. And then secondly, and perhaps even more of a powder keg than transgender birth certificate, sanctuary state legislation. Those are the kind of issues that this research says are animating a lot of voters, a lot of Trump voters in Illinois who weren't voting for other Republicans or weren't voting at all in previous elections, and who aren't on board for kind of the Mitt Romney profile and platform, frankly. And this presents problems to me. I'm not endorsing all of this because I'm a free market kind of guy myself. So I don't agree with the mercantilist economic policy that Trump pursues in part and that a lot of the electorate seems to like, regardless of whether it's Trump or somebody else pushing it. So I'm not endorsing it all, but you have to deal with the landscape as it actually is and then work to change it, not pretend that it doesn't exist, which is what the Republican Party seems to like to do in this state, pretend that the landscape is something other than they wish it were.
Yeah, and I don't think the electorate is as mercantilist as it appears from those numbers. I think you're talking about people who are fearful and want jobs. And so the rhetoric of closing down trade and buy American and all the different, and stop immigration appeals to the idea that I want a job. If they could get jobs through free market, if they could be convinced that that's the way that jobs would come and economic growth would come, they would move to that point. I truly believe that's the case.
I think you'd be surprised how many Republicans support a progressive income tax, like in Illinois, for example.
Well, yeah, and I think the second point with this is, and Illinois is true this way too, our state, not unlike Pennsylvania, not unlike Wisconsin, is not nearly as blue as people think that it is. And it's not nearly as blue as the governor thinks that it is. And he does not have to be Mitt Romney. Hey, I'm a fiscal conservative and a big social moderate to win the state. My fear is, in fact, I think it's the opposite. I think he'll alienate a lot of these voters if he goes too hard that way. In my view, he should be a traditional Republican. He should espouse the things that he believes in, but not alienate his conservative base. These numbers show that if he does that, what I think he should do, he's got a great chance at re-election. If he doesn't, he might not have enough voters on the North Shore of Chicago to get him across the finish line.